Do you think India is doing a good job at navigating the challenges in a polarized world?
India has done an extraordinary job under difficult circumstances.
Globalized.
Roy, coming up in the next hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's take everyone along approach to development has shown the world a new path towards progress. The fourth and final meeting of the G20 envoys begins at a Delhi suburb. It's for laying down the final agenda for next weekend's G20 summit. Russian President Vladimir Putin to meet his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Monday in Sochi to discuss the revival of the Black Sea grain deal. In the English Premier League, Liverpool thrashes Aston Villa, while Crystal Palace wins over the Wolves. And Max Verstappen claims a record 10th straight F1 win at the Italian GP. First up, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said many positive impacts are coming out of India's G20 presidency, with less than a week to go for its finale in New Delhi with the summit of all the G20 nations' leaders. In an interview to a news agency, the PM said India's vision has become a roadmap for the world and it has become a solution to global challenges. Take a look.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that India's take everyone along approach to development has shown the world a new path towards progress. A week ahead of hosting world leaders at the G20 summit in New Delhi, the Indian Prime Minister told a news agency in an interview that a GDP-centric view of the world is now changing to a human-centric one. Like a new world order was seen after World War II, a new world order is taking shape post-COVID-19. The Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas model that has shown the way in India can also be a guiding principle for the welfare of the world. The Prime Minister also restated his assertion that by 2047, India will become a developed nation free of ills like poverty and corruption. By 2047, I am sure that our country will be among the developed countries. Our poor people will comprehensively win the battle against poverty. Health, education and social sector outcomes will be among the best in the world. Corruption, casteism and communalism will have no place in our national life. Prime Minister Narendra Modi sounded dismissive about Chinese and Pakistani territorial claims over Arunachal Pradesh and Kashmir, as they had objected over the holding of G20 events at these venues. He said, "Ours is such a vast, beautiful and diverse nation. When G20 meetings are happening, isn't it natural that meetings will be held in every part of the country?" The Prime Minister also made a strong pitch for United Nations reforms in line with the changing realities of the world, saying a mid-20th century approach cannot serve the world in the 21st century. He reiterated that India backs the inclusion of the 55-nation African Union as a full-time member of the G20. Mihir Makri reporting for DD India.
Well, let's talk about this further. Joining us now is Ambassador Mohan Kumar, former senior diplomat. Good evening to you, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. What do you make of Prime Minister Modi, what he said about the upcoming G20 summit in the context of how he is expecting its impending success in terms of how, not just how India has led this entire process of its G20 presidency, but also how India is placed right now within this community of nations?
Thank you very much for having me. No, I thought the Prime Minister's speech was timely. And I thought it set the tone for a G20 summit that India is hosting after such a long time, and really the first time in the history of G20. I think the points he makes are lucid in terms of the complexity of the world, where he emphasizes that without cooperation, without hearing every single voice, you will not be able to resolve the issues. What I liked in particular, Gautam, was the fact that he was not confrontational vis-a-vis the North or the West. He's calling for cooperation between the richer countries and the poorer countries, for India to be a bridge between the North and the South, Obviously, India will try and be the voice of the global south. And some of the things that he mentioned are really concrete achievements. For example, in the area of agriculture, the fact that there has been a Deccan high principles of food security, the fact that in terms of the gender balance, we are trying to ensure gender digital divide, the fact that female labor participation needs to increase. So most of these issues will resonate with the global south. And I think we should not get diverted by what is happening in Ukraine or whether or not China or Russia are sending presidents. I liked the fact that the Prime Minister focused on substantive issues which will what will dominate this G20 summit, and where I think we will try and see if we can cooperate with the richer countries and come up with a solid result.
And what the Prime Minister said about GDP, that it's moving from GDP-centric to human-centric, it took back people to what Robert Kennedy once said in a famous speech, that GDP is everything in short except for what or which makes life worthwhile. But the context of today is again very important, isn't it? Because we're trying to measure, of course, India in terms of how it's progressing in the list of nations that are on top in terms of GDP, that we'll be number 3 by the end of this decade. But in terms of the way everything is being done inclusively, that has become another sort of a clarion call, hasn't it?
Oh, I think you are spot on. The GDP is important as far as it goes, but I think by focusing on the human-centric approach, as he calls it, what he's trying to say is that we have to be mindful of inequalities, both between nations and within countries. And this is something that we have to be particularly aware of. The one thing that I would point to your audience is that the Global Sustainable Development Report is going to be out in the second week of September by the UN Secretary General. And frankly, it makes terrible reading. Half of the world has been left behind. The world is completely off course in terms of achievement of SDG goals. So I think the Prime Minister is quite right in saying we need to have a human-centric approach, try and do something immediately so that the lower income countries can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make sure that the world is a much more equal place. Human-centric is something that I interpret as the need for more equality, both between countries and within the country.
When you talk about equality between countries, the whole push that India has been making for the inclusion of the African Union in the G20, would India's credentials of being a voice of the South get an unprecedented boost, really, if that were to happen, the inclusion of the African Union in this particular G20 summit that takes place in New Delhi next weekend?
Absolutely, without a shadow of doubt. Because it is in the UN Security Council, you will recognize, has no African voice at all. In terms of G20, I thought there are 2 moves that the government of India has done under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, which are master strokes. One is the Voice of the Global South Summit that we had in January, and mostly African countries. A lot of African countries participated. 125 countries participated, more than half were from Africa. Second, by pushing for the inclusion of the African Union in the G20, we are making a point to the developed countries and other members of G20 that Africa needs to find its voice. It is important that we include African Union, and I think this is again another reason why it burnishes the credentials of India, as you say, as the natural leader of Global South.
Right. And there are still those who question that this summit may not be a success because of certain key constituents of the G20, their top leaders are not going to be there. What can be said about that in terms of if we look at summits of the grouping in the past, there have always been cases where one or the other top leader hasn't come in. Yet you've had significant progress in the past as well.
It can be only a superficial assessment. Nothing can be more than a superficial assessment if you say that I am going to judge the success of the conference by who shows up and who does not. As far as I'm concerned, China is represented by somebody. I don't care who that somebody is. Russia is represented by somebody. Every country is represented by a plenipotentiary which has been appointed by the government. I think the proof of the pudding for me is in the eating. Let's look at the leaders' declaration. I am optimistic that, leaving aside the issue of Ukraine, on which I have nothing to say because I just don't know how it will pan out, on every other issue, please look at the Prime Minister's interview to PTI and you will realize that we have been able to come up with substantive outcomes, whether it is food security, gender divide, agriculture, digital public infrastructure. India played a pivotal role in the working group on digital economy, and we will be able to come up with the One Future Alliance, which will be a grouping which will deal with digital trade. So you really can't ignore the 13 ministerial meetings in 60 cities and 28 states, the kind of documents that have come up with. Of course, they will need to be implemented. But you will notice that on each and every issue, India has tried to do two things. One, we have tried to be the voice of the global South. Two, we have tried to act as a bridge between the North and the South. So I wouldn't judge this conference at all on whether a personality comes or not. That is simply irrelevant, frankly.
And in terms of how you would assess the success, could you sort of set the parameters and tell us that if these parameters are met, then this summit will be considered a success?
I would say that's a wonderful question. One, I would say that India set a goal for itself, which is showcasing India from a tourism, investment, and trade perspective. I would tick that box straight away because 60 cities, every city has had something to show for it. You know, I have been to some of these cities, and the fact that these cities have built capacity to receive G20 delegates is in itself a worthwhile investment. So that is the first. Second, in terms of India being the voice of the global South, we would have to see how much money is set aside for climate finance and for SDG goals. That is, I am told, a subject of very tough negotiation that is going on as we speak. But quite apart from the money that will be decided, what is, I think, remarkable is that India, along with others in the G20, already has established a plan for restructuring the multi-development banks, the multilateral development banks. There is an encasing Lawrence Summers report which talks of capital adequacy growth and capital adequacy frameworks, which will have to be followed by the banks. All this is to make sure that banks lend more money for lower income countries. So as India being the voice of the global South, I would tick that box as well. The one box that I would hesitate and wait to see the final declaration is where we are being a bridge between the North and the South, because that concerns Ukraine, frankly, and we will have to wait and see how the final declaration pans out.
Mm-hmm. And even in terms of easing the debt burden that many countries are facing, that is also something that would be very keenly watched. But we'll have to leave it there at the moment. Ambassador Kumar, thank you so much for joining us this evening to talk about it. Lots will be talked about the upcoming G20 summit in the coming days as well, right here on DD India and everywhere else as well. It's a major global event and we'll be tracking that very closely. Now, still to come up on DD India News are a crucial meeting in Russia to determine the fate of the suspended Black Sea grain deal coming up on Monday. And the fourth and final round of the G20 Sherpas or envoys that are meeting ahead of the Delhi summit.
Welcome to Jaipur.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin will be hosting a summit with his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, in the Black Sea resort city of Sochi on Monday. The two leaders will discuss the fallout from Russia's military intervention in Ukraine, as well as a deal that allowed the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea. According to Erdogan's chief foreign policy advisor, the Turkish president and Vladimir Putin will focus on the Black Sea grain deal quite pointedly. Danube River port infrastructure, which recently came under Russian drone attack, is critical to Ukraine's grain exports. Ankara acknowledged the technical complexities surrounding the agreement, particularly concerning Russian grain and payment mechanisms. The issue also involves international payment systems such as SWIFT, posing a multifaceted challenge. Let's now take you across to DD India's Dasha Cherneshova in Moscow to talk about this crucial upcoming meeting. Good evening to you, Dasha. Now, what can we expect from this latest bid to revive the grain deal, which has been under suspension from Russia's end for nearly the last 6 weeks?
Well, certainly all eyes will be on the meeting between the Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Sochi on Monday. The sides are indeed expected to talk about the grain in all the aspects of this word. When it comes to the implementation of the Black Sea grain deal, Moscow has been very clear it will not rejoin the arrangement unless the Russian part of the deal is implemented. And Moscow has blamed the West, saying that apparently it is easier to find new routes rather than persuade the West to implement the Russian demands. In the meantime, Ankara is willing to try to persuade Russia to get back to the arrangement, saying that it is important for the whole world. And we have heard Ankara saying that Ankara was cautious, but yet very hopeful that this is actually possible. But also, Russia has came up with its own proposal, saying that there is an idea of sending up to 1 million tons of grain to Turkey for further processing and then sending to the countries mostly in need. This will be proceeding at a discounted price with the financial support from Qatar. This has been described by the Russian officials as the working alternative to the Black Sea grain deal. So certainly there is a host of issues that is expected to be on the agenda of the two sides, particularly when it comes to the Black Sea grain deal or any other alternatives to this arrangement.
All right. But is there a willingness among the Western powers to meet the conditions Russia has been reiterating for returning to the grain deal?
From the Russian perspective, there is no willingness among the Western nations. However, the United Nations has sent the letter to Russia, to which Russia has not responded. The letter apparently was providing certain guarantees to Russia. But Moscow has been very clearly saying that it is all the Western fault that Russia had not to extend the Black Sea grain deal in July, saying that because there has been lack of implementation of the Russian part of this memorandum, that is the removing of the obstacles to the exports of Russian-owned agricultural exports, fertilizers, grain, and many other issues, including the SWIFT payment system, insurance, freight, ammonia pipeline, as well as the spare parts for the agricultural production. There has been zero progress, and Moscow says the West is responsible for zero progress in that direction. However, Moscow has also been saying that it is thankful to the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, saying that he was indeed making the effort, but it is again the Western countries that do not want to see the implementation of this Black Sea grain deal. So that has been all the time the position of Russia. Let's see what comes out of the meeting between the two leaders in Sochi on Monday.
And can we also expect President Erdogan to try and make another attempt at peace between Russia and Ukraine, because he has made several already. Even China has made a proposal, and we've also learned that Vladimir Putin, or the Kremlin, saying that he will be traveling to China very soon, perhaps in October.
That's right. That's on the minds of everyone at the moment, we might guess. But certainly Russia has been saying that it is Ukraine that is unwilling to get back to the negotiating table. Again, this is the Russian position. And Moscow has been saying that it is open for the negotiations. Ankara, on its part, has always been pushing for the negotiated solution, as well as China, that has been coming up with a peace plan. But again, to all of those plans, Russia has been saying very clearly that Kiev is unwilling to negotiate because of the supplies of weapons from the Western countries. So again, from the Russian perspective, it is really important to get back to the negotiating table, but not at the moment, as Ukraine is getting more and more weapons.
Okay, thanks a lot for that update, Dasha. Now, in an attempt towards progress, Ukrainian government has cracked down on business magnate Ihor Kolomoisky with huge political and economic clout in the country. The court ordered his police custody for 2 months with bail conditions of more than $13 million. Ihor has been accused of fraud and money laundering and was under the US sanctions since 2021. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has thanked law enforcement bodies for their resolve in bringing long-running cases to justice.
Of course, we will protect Ukraine and return freedom to our entire land. And each of us feels that this will be a Ukraine of different rules. The borders will be the same, democracy probably just as turbulent. Freedom one of the largest in Europe, as always, but certainly without the long-standing as usual regarding those who robbed Ukraine and put themselves above the law and any rules. And I thank the Ukrainian law enforcement officers for their determination to bring to a just outcome each and every one of the cases that have been hindered for decades. The law must work. It does, it will continue to do so.
And now it's time to get you some reports on the mega build-up to the G20 summit in Delhi. Well, Delhi has been gearing up for the G20 summit. Full dress rehearsals have been conducted ahead of the upcoming event. Authorities have advised the people to stay updated on real-time traffic information through the G20 virtual help desk for route suggestions when traveling to or from the airport, railway stations or bus terminals. And the fourth and final meeting of the G20 Sherpas began on Sunday in Nuh in the northern state of Haryana, very close to the national capital, Delhi. The meeting will lay down the final agenda for the upcoming G20 summit, which is scheduled to take place in Delhi on the 9th and 10th of this month. My colleague Amritpal Singh gets us this report from Nuh.
The last Sherpa meeting before the leaders' meeting of the G20 summit, which takes place in New Delhi on the 9th and 10th of this month, kicked off from today on Sunday here at ITC Grand Bharat, Haryana's Nuh in the Mewat region. Of course, cultural diplomacy is an important aspect of it. The delegates were given a warm cultural welcome here at this hotel. But the mainstay would be the final negotiations before the leaders meet so that the Sherpas can finalize the agenda and present it to the leaders.
Sherpas of all the G20 nations have arrived here for the final negotiations for the summit next weekend. They will decide on the content of the joint communique that will be presented on the 9th and the 10th of September. The main task ahead for the Sherpa and the finance track will be forging the final leaders' declaration.
Though there is consensus on many issues like women-led development, working towards accelerating the progress on the sustainable development goals, looking at startups, giving the startup ecosystem a push, accelerated and resilient growth, disaster-resilient infrastructure, the needs, concerns, aspirations of the global south being factored entered into the global narrative, but there remain differences as well. The divergences are mainly the big elephant in the room is the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. Given the deep divisions that exist within Russia and the West, the Sherpas are trying hard to see if some sort of understanding can be achieved on that and the way forward. India during its presidency has been consistently advocating dialogue and diplomacy, and that is what India would want to push, and so that it can be presented to the leaders to come to a conclusive Delhi declaration by the end of the G20 summit. With my colleague Jessica Taneja and cameraman Bhim Singh, this is Amritpal Singh for DD India in Haryana's Mewat.
Continuing our coverage on the G20 summit and our in-depth look at some of the nations taking part, turning our focus to the leaders who make up the G20 club and their path to leadership.
Vladimir Putin has been the dominant force in Russian politics for the past 2 decades, serving as president twice since 2000. After studying law at Leningrad State University, he worked as a foreign intelligence officer for 16 years. Once leaving the KGB, he became a city official in St. Petersburg. Within a few years, he was promoted to Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Executive Office. After a brief stint as Director of the Federal Security Service, he was appointed Prime Minister in 1999. Following Boris Yeltsin's resignation, he became acting president and just 4 months later was elected to the top job. He became Prime Minister again in 2008 under political ally Dmitry Medvedev, but returned to the presidency 4 years later.
Now, one of India's priorities during its G20 presidency has been to support regions through climate finance to help them grow greener. Jessica Taneja has the details.
In a poor village, untouched by electricity, miles away from the nearest town, children are learning, reading books under the glare of a lone street light. It was made possible because of this microgrid system. It helps provide clean, affordable and reliable electricity in remote areas where the main grid doesn't exist.
Approximately 100 houses and 40 to 50 shops can be powered by this. It makes houses and markets independent of main electricity grids.
The numbers tell a compelling story. The cost of solar energy plummeted by almost 80% in the last decade. It costs half the price of thermal energy. Offices in the national capital are also reaping the benefits of affordable and clean energy.
We use a 60 kilowatt system. We supply the save electricity units back to the government. We save approximately $6,000 each month in electricity bills.
Although the country hopes to use 40% of its yearly energy from the sun, depending on it entirely for the long haul might run into some bumps.
We need to invest in the technology because we are totally dependent on the imported material. So we need to invest in the technology so that in the next 10 to 15 years, we can be self-sufficient.
For one village, it's a revolution that's come quickly. But this will be a generational shift from thermal power to solar, and that could be a long road ahead. Jessica Taneja for DD India.
Let's now take a look at some of the other stories that are making news around the country. Hotels have been decked up in New Delhi to welcome G20 delegates as the summit begins on the 9th of this month. They've made special arrangements, including some cultural ceremonies to give a royal welcome to the guests. Hotels have been decorated with flowers and rangolis. Different menus have been prepared to meet the taste and requirements of the guests. US President Joe Biden, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman are likely to attend the summit. India's space agency has switched off its moon rover after it completed its 2-week assignment of conducting experiments. The Indian Space Research Organization said in a post on X, formerly Twitter, that the Pragyan rover from the Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft was set into sleep mode, but with batteries fully charged and receiver on. Pragyan is equipped to record what the lunar soil and rocks are made of. In the South Polar region, India became the first country to land its spacecraft on the rugged south pole of the moon. Top officials of India's Law Ministry on Sunday briefed former President Ramnath Kovind, who heads a high-level committee to examine the feasibility of holding national and provincial elections simultaneously. The Indian government has set an 8-member panel for the purpose. This panel includes Home Minister Amit Shah, opposition leaders Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary, Ghulam Nabi Azad and other distinguished people. Over 100 roads, including national highways, have been blocked in India's northern state of Himachal Pradesh due to heavy rains. Local authorities said water supply has been disrupted in several parts of the state. The state has been ravaged by heavy rains for several weeks, causing landslides, cloudbursts and flash floods. According to the government's data, nearly 400 people have lost their lives in rain-related incidents in recent weeks. And still to come up on DD India News Hour, Gabon's military ruler promises a return to democracy without setting any deadline. North Korea rings more alarm bells across the world with nuclear missile drills. And celebs and activists chant "Free Iran" on the red carpet of the Venice Film Festival. Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. Before we go any further, let's have another look at our top stories. Prime Minister Narendra Modi says India's Take Everyone Along approach to development has shown the world a new path towards progress. The fourth and final meeting of the G20 envoys has begun in Delhi's suburb Noor. The meeting is to lay down the final agenda for next week's G20 summit. Russian President Vladimir Putin is to meet his Turkish counterpart Recep Tayyip Erdogan on Monday in Sochi to discuss the revival of the Black Sea grain deal. Thousands of people flocked outside a French military base in Niger's capital Niamey, calling on the French soldiers to leave the country. After the July coup that overthrew the democratic government in Niger, the military junta had asked ambassadors of various nations to leave the country. Western countries, including France, do not recognize the military regime and have refused to follow their orders. Niger has also cut military coordination with the French forces. And the head of Gabon's junta, General Brice Origi Neema, met with local bankers in capital Libreville to discuss the country's economy. Neema is likely to be sworn in as president of the transitional government on Monday. He and his colleagues seized power on the 30th of August by placing President Ali Bongo under house arrest. Gabon's dollar-dominated bonds plummeted by more than 13 cents the day Bongo's government was toppled. At the same time, Gabon's new military leader has pledged to return the country to democracy but has refused to provide a timeline for new elections. General Brice Oligui Nguema has said that the country's state institutions will be made more democratic and the suspension is only temporary. DD India's Isaac Lucando has more from Dar es Salaam.
Coup leaders in Gabon say they want to avoid rushing into elections that repeat past mistakes. This as pressure mounts to revert back to civilian rule. Crowds celebrated in the capital Libreville as West and Central Africa witnessed its 8th coup in 3 years. Following the coup, military officers annulled the results of the country's latest presidential election. The political contest had seen ousted President Ali Bongo declared the winner, with the opposition calling it fraudulent. Mr. Bongo was subsequently placed under house arrest, ending his family's 55-year hold on power in the Central African state. Regional bloc, the Economic Community of Central African States, says it plans to meet as soon as possible to discuss the latest developments. It is calling on its partners, led by the United Nations and the African Union, to aid a rapid return to constitutional order. Isaac Lucando in Dar es Salaam, reporting for DD India.
North Korea conducted a simulated tactical nuclear attack drill with 2 long-range cruise missiles carrying mock nuclear warheads on Saturday. North Korea's state media said the drill was carried out to warn enemies that the country is prepared in case of a nuclear war. This as Pyongyang again vowed to strengthen military deterrence against the United States and South Korea. In a separate report, the Korean Central News Agency has released photographs of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un inspecting shipbuilding and munitions factories. And the South Korean military has claimed that North Korea fired several cruise missiles into the Yellow Sea as well. The cruise missiles were fired in the early hours of Saturday. An investigation into the launch is underway by South Korean and US intelligence agencies. In Iraq, 3 protesters were shot dead and 14 were wounded during clashes on Saturday. The clashes broke out after days of tensions between ethnic groups in the northern Iraqi oil city of Kirkuk. The dispute centers on a building in Kirkuk that was once the headquarters for the Kurdistan Democratic Party, but which the Iraqi army has used as a base since 2017. The Iraqi government plans to return to the building to the KDP in a show of goodwill, but Arab and Turkmen opponents set up a camp outside the building last week in protest. Prime Minister Mohammed al-Sudani ordered a curfew in the city to prevent an escalation of the violence. Tens of thousands of Israeli protesters took to the streets of Tel Aviv. Israelis have been protesting against Benjamin Netanyahu's planned judicial overhaul. And this is the 35th consecutive week when Israelis are again out on the streets. In August, Israel's Supreme Court began hearing the appeals linked to Netanyahu's judicial overhaul, which has moved the country in an unprecedented domestic crisis. Preparations are on in full swing throughout Taiwan as Typhoon Haikui nears. It's expected to make landfall late on Sunday afternoon and bring heavy rain and strong winds. Firefighters have cordoned off the risk areas and are urging people to stay away from beaches. Taiwan's 2 main domestic airlines had to cancel all the flights on Sunday. The military has mobilized soldiers and equipment to help with flood relief and evacuation efforts. And Typhoon Saola made landfall in South China's Guangdong province on Saturday. The typhoon made its first landing on the southern coast of Guangdong's Zhuhai city and another on the Hailing island of Guangdong's Yanjiang city. It later weakened to a tropical storm. Following the weakening of the typhoon, production and life in Guangdong have returned to normal, with passenger train services, flights and ferries resumed. And on the other side of the globe, United States President Joe Biden traveled to Florida on Saturday to survey Hurricane Idalia's relief efforts and comfort victims of the storm. Joe Biden visited the city of Live Oak, a town that was hard hit by the storm, and met first responders and local officials there. The president also took stock of houses with fallen trees on them. Briefing the media, Biden pointed to this year's extreme weather events and disasters stressing on the impact of the climate crisis.
Nobody can deny the impact of climate crisis. Nobody intelligent can deny the impact of the climate crisis anymore. Just look around the nation and the world for that matter. Historic floods, intense droughts, extreme heat, deadly wildfires that have caused serious damage like we've never seen before. Just since being president, in 2.5 years, I've flown over more land burned to the ground as a consequence of wildfires than occupy the entire land of the state of Maryland, from down in New Mexico and Alabama all up into Montana and around. It's been devastating.
Heavy rains and storms caused flooding across northern and western Spain after heat waves roasted the country throughout the summer. After the high temperatures of August, the country suffered torrential downpours, which are expected to persist until Monday. Let's now take a look at some other updates from around the world as well. Well, hundreds of people took to streets in Serbian capital Belgrade to protest against the government. The protesters chanted for the removal of President Aleksandar Vučić. Protesters started in Serbia after 2 mass shootings in May. Demonstrators are calling on politicians to end corruption and violence in Serbia. An Egyptian Air Force aircraft was refueled mid-air on Sunday as part of exercise Bright Star 23 between India and the Egyptian Air Force. In a significant move towards fostering global defense cooperation, the Indian Air Force contingent is taking part in the biennial multilateral tri-service exercise in Cairo. The exercise, which began on Sunday and will continue till mid-September. Celebrities and activists staged a protest on the red carpet of the Venice Film Festival in solidarity with the Iranian people. The demonstrators chanted "Free Iran" and "Women, Life, Freedom." Iranian actor Zar Amir Ebrahimi also participated in the demonstration. Iranian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Ali Reza Inayati, will soon leave for Riyadh to head Tehran's diplomatic mission in the kingdom. After a 7-year diplomatic impasse, Tehran officially reopened its embassy in Riyadh this June. Iran also opened its consulate in Jeddah. Tens of thousands of festival goers are stranded in Nevada's Black Rock Desert in the US. Heavy rains turned the Burning Man Festival campsite into a mud bath. Revelers attending the event have been told to conserve their food and water. US media has reported that more than 70,000 people have been stuck there since Saturday. Access to and from the event site has been closed for the remainder of the event, and more rain is expected in the coming days. And still to come up in DD India News Hour, a special report from the world's largest consumer electronics show in Berlin, where Indian startups are shining. Max Verstappen makes a new record, a 10th straight F1 win. And after the washout against Pakistan, India is to take on Nepal in the Asia Cup on Monday.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, Stories of real change. Tales of sustainable solution. This series is going to tell stories of such change makers. Watch Change Makers on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, India's first indigenously built destroyer, INS Delhi, concluded its successful goodwill visit to Colombo on Sunday. A reception was hosted by High Commissioner Gopal Bagle on Saturday on board the ship. Speaker of Sri Lanka's Parliament, Mahinda Yapa Abeyewardena, was the chief guest at the reception. He received an HADR medical kit from the High Commissioner on behalf of the Sri Lankan government. Abeyewardena expressed gratitude for India's continued support and emphasized the close ties between the two maritime neighbors. Commander of INS Delhi, Captain Abhishek Kumar, and the crew paid respects at the Indian Peacekeeping Forces Memorial. The visit also included a maritime partnership exercise. INS Delhi opened its doors to school children and the people, fostering greater understanding, while professional interactions were held for Sri Lankan Navy personnel. This visit reflects India's commitment to its neighborhood-first policy and the security and growth for all in the region, or the Sagar Doctrine. And the world's largest consumer electronics show has been on in Berlin, and as DD India's Trend Mare reports, the European event is becoming a focal point for investors interested in the exponential growth of India's startup scene.
For almost 100 years, IFA Berlin has put the latest advancements in consumer electronics centre stage, bringing together the best and brightest in technology and innovation, and giving a platform for products that could just change the way we live and work.
You'll see, crazy, wacky things. You'll see hopefully one or two ideas that might change the world. We know that half of these startups are never going to make it, right? That's not the point. The point is to ensure that people see IFA as a place where you can come and see innovation.
And much of that innovation is increasingly coming from India. The event seeing a large contingent of companies from the subcontinent. Startups like Bangalore-based Ultrahuman, which is tapping into the lucrative multi-million-dollar wearables sector, attracting international interest and investment.
Our product is the Ultrahuman ring, so I'll just show that to you. It's 2.5 grams, super tiny. The idea was to have a wearable that's practically invisible, that you almost forget that you're wearing, but it's keeping track in the background and trying to understand how are you living your life. So now we ship to more than 50 countries across the world. So we started going offline into retail. So the first one was Selfridges in London, and then in Dubai we have Virgin Mega Stores in Dubai Mall and Mall of the Emirates. Dubai Mall gets 100 million visitors a year, so I think the message will get out.
India's economic growth, skilled workforce and pro-business policies means there is a strong sense of optimism for the future trajectory of the tech sector.
The talent pool, the confidence that I see in young Indian engineers, people in the tech space, I get inspired by it, right? So I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it, because these are folks who they don't think that they have any disadvantage. In fact, they think that, look, being in an ecosystem like a Bangalore or Gurgaon or being in Mumbai, they have huge advantages in terms of creating products for India, creating products for the world, whatever you wish. So I think there's just a lot of energy, there's a lot of vibrance.
With the G20 just days away, world leaders are expected to come together to try and find solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems across health and climate change, peace and security and economic policy. Both big companies here and startups say that technological solutions should be front and centre of those conversations taking place in New Delhi. One thought leader ready to offer her views ahead of the summit? Desdemona, the humanoid robot, who gave DD India her own take on the world's most populous nation.
Namaste. India is an amazing place with so much potential for economic growth. I'm excited to see what the future holds for India's economy.
And what about the question of whether humans should welcome or worry about the changes that artificial intelligence could bring?
I believe robots are here to help humans in many ways. We can help with tasks that are tedious, dangerous, or require precision. We can also provide a unique perspective that can lead to new and innovative solutions.
Thank you very much for your answer.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to chat about AI and robotics.
While that contentious conversation will likely continue on whether AI will improve or impair the way we live, there is no questioning the disruption the technology is likely to bring across almost all sectors. And in the quest to further research and develop AI, India's growing economic might and track record of innovation means the country has a competitive edge in a field that will likely dominate the 21st century. Trent Murray in Berlin for DD India.
And now it's time to get you all the sporting updates as well right here on DD India News Hour. Well, Max Verstappen set a new Formula One record in the Italian Grand Prix as Ferrari battled between themselves. After passing Carlos Sainz for the lead on lap 15, Verstappen was untroubled as he took a 10th win on the trot to surpass the record previously held by Sebastian Vettel of 9. Sergio Perez was second with Sainz third after a thrilling late battle with teammate Charles Leclerc for the final podium spot. George Russell was fifth and Lewis Hamilton sixth as both Mercedes received 5 second time penalties during the race, which ultimately did not change their positions. Liverpool comfortably beat Aston Villa to continue their strong start to the season in the Premier League. Liverpool made an electric start to the contest as they piled the pressure on Aston Villa with a wonderful goal just 3 minutes in. Dominic Szoboszlai lashed onto a loose ball and smashed the ball into the net from outside the box. Mohamed Salah put speculation about his future behind him as he scored the final goal for the Reds. And Crystal Palace took a thrilling win over the Wolves with a frantic finish. Odsonne Edouard scored twice as Palace beat Wolves by 3-2. Edouard opened the scoring after he got in between the two Wolves defenders to finish from Tariq Michele's excellent cross. Wolves substitute Wang Hee-chan equalized 6 minutes early after entering the field, getting on the end of a free kick from Pedro Neto. Then Edouard combined with Mateta and produced a calm, slotted finish. And in cricket, the Asia Cup 2023 is underway and has almost reached the end of the group stage. The match between India and Pakistan was washed out, which resulted in both the teams sharing 1 point each. And now, India will play their second game on Monday against Nepal.
After having a whitewash in previous fixtures against Pakistan, India will face Nepal in the second encounter on Monday. India are ranked number 2 in Group A with the 1 point and need to win or tie against Nepal to qualify for the Super 4 stage. The men in blue were seen struggling against the potent seam attack of Pakistan, as they were reduced to 66 for the loss of 4 wickets after 14.1 overs. Star batters Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli, Shubman Gill and Shreyas Iyer returned to the pavilion cheaply. However, knocks from Ishan Kishan and Hardik Pandya helped India to score decent. On the other hand, Nepal were completely outplayed in their opening fixture against Pakistan. The Rohit Pudel-led side was bundled out for just 104 runs. Nepal need a must-win to progress to the Super 4 stage of the continental tournament. After losing against Pakistan, Nepal is currently at the bottom position in the Asia Cup 2023 points table. Both the sides will be desperate to get a win under the belt and progress to the next stage in the upcoming fixtures.
And that's all we have for the moment in this edition of DD India News Hour. But do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram as well. We'll be back with more news and updates as they break right here on DD India. I'm Gautam Roy, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India News Hour.